April 17, 1945. A grim camp in northern Germany. Just days after liberation, British forces reached the epicenter of unspeakable horror. Among the captured is a young woman whose striking appearance masked a legacy of cruelty that survivors would never forget. Irma Grese, once called the beautiful beast, now a prisoner herself. In mere months, she will face the ultimate consequence, death by hanging. She will become the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. She is 22 years old. But her execution is not where this story begins. To understand how someone so young could become one of history's most notorious war criminals, we must journey into the darkness that shaped her. We must ask the question that haunts us still. How does a farmer's daughter from a quiet German town become an instrument of mass murder? This is not a story of glorification, this is a story of warning. Born October 7, 1923 in the small town of Retten, Germany, Irma Ilse Ida Grese was the third of 5 children. Her father, Alfred Grese, was a dairy farmer, strict, domineering, and fiercely opposed to the Nazi Party. Even as the regime's grip tightened across Germany, Alfred refused to allow his children to join the Hitler Youth. He resisted the pressure, the propaganda, the threats. But resistance would prove futile. The poison of Nazi ideology was seeping into every corner of German society, and it would reach Irma in ways no father could prevent. Her mother was a quiet woman who tried desperately to hold the family together. But in 1936, when Irma was just 13 years old, tragedy shattered their world. Unable to cope with the emotional devastation of her husband's infidelity, Irma's mother took her own life. This loss marked the beginning of Irma's transformation. Her father's response was brutal. Grief became rage. His fists became his method of discipline. Irma, like her siblings, endured violent outbursts that deepened her emotional wounds. Her world became a cauldron of resentment and confusion. At school, she was mercilessly bullied. Her grades collapsed. By 14, she had dropped out entirely. She drifted through the next few years, working on farms, briefly at a retail shop, later at a sanitarium. Each job a dead end. Each day a reminder of her insignificance. But beneath the surface, something darker was growing. She wasn't just lost, she was being molded. In 1942, Irma found work at the Holloway sanatorium as an assistant nurse. It was here she first encountered the SS medical staff, including doctors who conducted horrific experiments on prisoners. She wasn't merely a bystander, she observed, she learned, she participated. Then came the recruitment. The SS needed women to serve as guards in the rapidly expanding concentration camp system. No medical training required, no compassion necessary, only obedience. Irma volunteered. In March 1942, at age 18, she arrived at Ravensbrück, the largest women's concentration camp in Nazi Germany. Ravensbrück was a death factory. Women were subjected to torture, forced labor, starvation, and grotesque medical experiments. It was here, under the supervision of senior female guards, that Irma's sadistic nature fully emerged. She was taught that cruelty was duty, that prisoners were not human beings but enemies of the state, that violence was necessary, justified, even virtuous. The training was explicit: extract maximum labor from prisoners until they died. Irma learned quickly, and she learned well. She carried a whip, she participated in beatings. She watched women scream as their legs were broken with hammers, as wounds were deliberately infected with bacteria. And something inside her changed, or perhaps revealed itself. She didn't just witness the suffering, she began to enjoy it. In March 1943, Irma Grese was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was 19 years old. Auschwitz was not merely a prison, it was an industrial complex designed for extermination. Over 1 million people, primarily Jews but also Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners and countless others, were murdered there between 1940 and 1945. Irma became a senior supervisor overseeing the women's section of Birkenau. She was given authority over thousands of prisoners, and she wielded that authority with terrifying enthusiasm. She was tall, blonde, striking, a living embodiment of the Aryan ideal the Nazis worshipped. She wore polished boots, carried a pistol and a leather whip. Survivors would later say she seemed to take pride in her appearance, as though cruelty were a performance. And in many ways it was. What survivors remember most is not just what she did, but how she did it. She beat prisoners without warning or reason. She used her whip, her fists, her boots. She selected women for the gas chambers with casual indifference, sometimes because she found them threatening, sometimes because she found them attractive, sometimes for no reason at all. One survivor recalled, "You never forgot the sound of her boots on the ground. When you heard that sound, you prayed she would walk past you." Another testified, "She smiled while we cried. She seemed to feed on our suffering." A third said, "She was a child with a weapon, and she used it without mercy." Irma participated in the selections on the arrival ramp, the process by which prisoners were sorted upon arrival. With a gesture, a glance, a word, she determined who would live to work and who would die immediately in the gas chambers. But her cruelty extended far beyond the ramps. She forced prisoners to stand for hours holding heavy stones, their arms trembling, their bodies collapsing from exhaustion. Those who faltered were beaten. She deliberately starved dogs and set them loose on prisoners, watching with cold satisfaction as they were mauled. She stripped women naked in freezing temperatures and forced them to perform impossible exercises until they collapsed. She selected women she perceived as more beautiful than herself and sent them to their deaths out of jealousy. Her sadism was not random. It was deliberate, calculated, and deeply personal. Irma Grese was not the only female guard. There were others, some older, some younger, who participated in the same system. But even among them, Grese stood out. Survivors described her as one of the most, not because she was the most senior, but because she seemed to take pleasure in the suffering of others. Psychologists have studied how ordinary people become perpetrators of atrocity. The conditions are consistent: dehumanization of victims, authority that legitimizes violence, peer pressure that normalizes cruelty, an ideological justification that reframes murder as duty. Irma existed in all of these conditions simultaneously. But there was something more, something survivors sensed but struggled to articulate. She didn't just follow orders, she exceeded them. She sought opportunities to inflict pain. She volunteered for the cruelest duties. This was not reluctant obedience. This was willing participation. Let us pause here to remember the human beings who endured her cruelty. Women who were mothers, daughters, sisters, wives. Women who had committed no crime except being born into the wrong place at the wrong time. One woman testified that Grese beat her so severely she could not walk for weeks. Another described being forced to watch executions as punishment for minor infractions. A third recalled standing naked in the snow for hours while Grese mocked her suffering. These were not isolated incidents. They were the daily texture of life under Irma Grese's authority. The horror was not exceptional, it was routine. By January 1945, the Soviet Red Army was closing in on Auschwitz. The Nazi leadership ordered the camp's evacuation. Tens of thousands of prisoners, already starving, sick and weak, were forced on death marches westward through frozen terrain. Irma Grese was assigned to supervise one of these marches. Prisoners died from exhaustion, hypothermia, starvation. Those who fell behind were shot. The roads were lined with bodies. Even as the right crumbled around her, the machinery of cruelty continued. In March 1945, Grese was transferred to Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany. The camp was in complete collapse. Disease spread unchecked, typhus ravaged the prisoners, food supplies had ceased, bodies lay unburied in massive piles, thousands were dying every day. Yet even here, even in this hell of chaos and death, Irma Grese continued to exercise her authority. Survivors recalled her beating prisoners, enforcing discipline, maintaining the rituals of power, even as the Nazi regime disintegrated around her. She was a true believer, convinced that Germany's survival depended on the extermination of those deemed unworthy. On April 15, 1945, British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. They found over 60,000 prisoners, most barely alive. They found 13,000 unburied corpses. They found survivors so emaciated they could barely stand. And they found Irma Grese, still in her SS uniform, defiant and unrepentant. She was arrested immediately. The British soldiers who entered Bergen-Belsen were confronted with horrors beyond comprehension. Photographs were taken, mass graves were documented, testimonies were recorded. The world would soon see the truth. Irma Grese was among 45 camp staff members charged with crimes against humanity. Her trial began in September 1945 in Lüneburg, Germany. She was 21 years old when she sat in the defendant's dock. One by one, survivors came forward. They described beatings without provocation. They recounted selections for the gas chambers where Grese chose victims with a smile. They testified to her deliberate cruelty, the starvation, the torture, the humiliation. She beat us until we couldn't stand. She laughed during the selections. She showed no mercy, not once. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of witnesses documented crimes, undeniable patterns of behavior. Irma's defense was simple and chilling. She claimed she was merely following orders. She argued she had no direct role in killings. She insisted she was simply doing her duty. When asked why she had committed such horrors, she replied without hesitation, "It was our duty to exterminate antisocial elements so that Germany's future would be assured." These words revealed everything. Not remorse, not doubt, but total unwavering belief in Nazi ideology. The British tribunal rejected her defense. The principle was clear: responsibility does not disappear through obedience. Individuals must answer for their actions, regardless of orders received. The evidence was irrefutable, the testimonies devastating, the crimes undeniable. On November 17, 1945, Irma Grese was found guilty of crimes against humanity. She was sentenced to death by hanging. When the verdict was read, she showed no emotion. Irma Grese was transferred to Holloway prison in London, a civilian facility used for executions. She was held in isolation, guarded around the clock by military police. Eyewitness accounts describe her final days as eerily calm. She sang songs, she read, she slept soundly. There was no confession, no tease, no plea for mercy. Some interpreted this as courage. Others saw it as evidence of something broken inside her, an inability to comprehend the magnitude of her crimes. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the execution team arrived. The hangman was Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's chief executioner, known for his efficiency and professionalism. Irma was led from her cell. According to witnesses, she walked steadily, her posture upright, her expression blank. She did not resist, she did not plead, she did not cry. As the noose was placed around her neck, she spoke her final words, "Schnell," quickly. The trapdoor opened. It was over in seconds. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison grounds. Newspapers around the world carried the story. The beautiful beast executed, the youngest woman hanged under British law in the 20th century. A Nazi guard who became a symbol of the camps. But symbols do not bleed, people do. And people she destroyed numbered in the thousands. In the decades since her execution, historians have debated Irma Grese's legacy. Was she simply a product of her environment, a victim of the Nazi machine that turned young girls into killers? Or was she, in her own right, an embodiment of evil, someone who chose cruelty when others in similar circumstances resisted? The tragedy is that Irma Grese was not born a monster, she was made one. Her mother's suicide, her father's violence, her isolation and bullying, the Nazi indoctrination that filled the void left by trauma, all of these factors shaped her. But unlike many others who had their humanity stripped away, Grese seemed to embrace the loss of her compassion. Survivors testified that she didn't just participate in violence, she enjoyed it. She smiled as she beat prisoners, she laughed at their pain, she sought opportunities to inflict suffering. This was not reluctant obedience, this was willing participation. What Irma Grese represents is perhaps the most disturbing truth about the Holocaust, that ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil when systems reward cruelty and strip away accountability. That beauty and youth are no protection against moral corruption. That ideology can reshape identity so completely that murder becomes duty. She was not unique. There were other guards, other perpetrators, other willing participants in genocide. But her story is a warning that evil does not only reside in dictators and generals, it lives in the ordinary, in the young, the uniformed, the obedient, when humanity is stripped away and replaced with dogma. The survivors of the Holocaust did not only bear witness to suffering, this is suffering, they taught us the importance of memory. They taught us that justice is memory. Then memory prevents repetition, every testimony recorded, every photograph preserved, every name remembered. These are acts of resistance against forgetting. The execution of Irma Grese was not the end of a woman, it was a warning to the future. It asks us to confront uncomfortable truths, that brutality grows in systems that normalize violence, that obedience without conscience is complicity, that we must never look away, and it demands that we remember not to glorify evil, but to prevent its return. In memory of the victims of Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Bergen-Belsen, their names, their stories, their lives never forgotten.